Online class link. Okay. Link comes already online class.
Morning.
Okay.
Okay. Fine. So I think for you guys, audio will be clear. So for you guys who are attending online, so is the audio clear? So can you just give me a
Clear,
hand?
sir.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Right. So I have never seen your faces, right? So I think few of you are here in front of me. Do I know anybody? Like, what's your name? Suryamuthu. Okay, Suryamuthu. Yes. Nashik. Nashik. Ashik. Okay, okay, fine. Sashank. Sorry? Monisha. Okay, so these are all a little new to me. But whomever I see here, Harshita, so Mithun, Rohan, so all these people I have already met. Okay, fine. So like the other faculty would have given you what kind of chapters you're going to study, like which kind of you have. If you go to 12th standard, you'll see that you'll have more of organic, less of physical, and little amount of inorganic. That's what you'll see, right? But in 11th, you would have seen that it is more amount of physical chemistry chapters, more amount of problem solving, say equilibrium, thermodynamics, say of the first chapter, some basic concepts of chemistry. So you had more number of physical chemistry, but in 12th you'll have more number of organic, right? So anyways, so today we'll be starting with solutions. Okay, solutions is a chapter, right? Fine. So just let me write. Yeah.
Sir, in the school they started haloarenes and haloalkanes, sir.
School you started haloalkanes and haloarenes. Okay.
Yes, sir. They started organic.
They
They
started.
started organic. What about you guys? What started? All of you have only haloalkanes and haloarenes. Okay. So should we start with them? We'll go with our order.
We'll go with India instead.
Okay, fine.
Students will be going with the order of NCERT only, as I mentioned previously. So we'll be starting with physical. Okay. Yeah.
Cool. Right. Fine. So let me just at least write the chapter name. Guys, please bear with my handwriting. Like some of you might know, some of you might not know that my handwriting is bad. Okay. Fine. Cool. So we have been hearing this term solutions from our lower classes, isn't it? From 6th or 7th, right? So you have been looking at this term solutions, right? Fine. So what are these, right? So for us to understand, let us go back to our 9th class, right? So if you go back to your 9th class, you would have seen a chapter called as Is Matter Around the Sphere. Do you remember the chapter name? Okay, cool. So you must have remembered it. So the first, say the classification, we know what matter is, isn't it? Matter, you want to say what matter is? How do you define matter? Anybody here online here? Anybody wants to tell what is matter? How do you define matter? How do you define matter? Yeah.
Matter is something which has mass and occupies a space.
Exactly, right. So matter is something which has mass and occupies some space, or basically anything which has mass and volume is what is called as matter, isn't it? Right. So that matter, I will be able to classify them into two types. Okay, and obviously the first kind of classification comes with respect to solids, liquids, and gases. That is first, that we already know, right? So based on this, like what I'm going to tell is here, you see that I'm going to have something called as pure substances, right? And I'm going to have something called as mixtures. Okay, right. So what are these? What are pure substances? What are mixtures? We'll try to understand, right? So pure substances, right? I'm going to define them as like this. They are going to be made up of single entities. Right? They're going to be made up of single entity. Okay, so that means they're going to be made up of only one single type of substance. We'll just call it a substance for now, but we'll see what is the single substance we're talking about. Right. So this single substance or single entity you're talking about is going to be in terms of atoms or molecules. Right. Say for example, if I give you how these pure substances are classified, then you'll be able to understand. Okay. So these pure substances can be further. Oh, this thing goes. Okay, fine, no issues. So when I go for pure substances, right? So there can be of two types again, depending on what is that single entity. I said that it is made up of single entity. What is that single entity? Based on that, again, I'll have two types. One are what are called as your elements, and the other one, can you guess? Yes, compounds. Right. So now, can you tell me what is that single entity I'm talking about? Say, if I take elements, can you tell me what is that single entity which I'm talking about? What are elements made up of? Atoms. Exactly. So if I take, for example, sodium element, right? It is going to be made up of only sodium atoms. Same way, if I have fluorine element, it is going to be made up of only fluorine atoms, right? So now, when I go to compounds, so basically what you have to understand is in case of elements, the single entity which I'm talking about is atoms, right? Okay. Now, when I go to compounds, can you tell me what is the single entity which I'm talking about? Absolutely, molecules, yes. Right? Say for example, if I say carbon dioxide, right? So carbon dioxide is a compound which will be made up of the single entity of molecules of carbon dioxide, right? Okay, fine. So we understood. That means you understand that the pure substances are going to be made up of single entity, right? So that single entity can either be atoms or molecules, or it can be even also. Can you guess one more? What can be the other single entity which I can speak about? Any guesses from people who are online or here? Okay. For example, if I take sodium chloride, what is the single entity there? Sorry? That's it. That is the third single entity. Ions. right? So either atoms or molecules or ions. It comes under compounds. So if at all it is going to be a covalent compound, molecules are going to be there, right? If it is going to be an ionic compound, then it is going to be ions, cations and anions, depending on what type of ionic solid you speak about, right? Okay, fine. So this is not we are going to speak about. This is not about the chapter. This is just an introduction, right? So going back to this, so we spoke about this pure substances, right? Now moving on to this mixtures, right? So how am I going to define these mixtures? Mixtures are going to be made up of two or more pure substances. Right? That's the easiest way to put it, isn't it? They are going to be made up of two or more pure substances, right? Okay. So now mixtures can be classified into two types again, right? I'll tell you what is the basis of this classification. I think, can you guess? Yes, absolutely. Homogeneous mixtures, I'm writing in short form. Okay. Homogeneous and heterogeneous mixtures, right? Okay. Fine. So homogeneous mixtures we know, right? So if I was teaching for lower classes for 9th, 10th kids. So how will I explain them this homogeneous and heterogeneous mixture? Is a simple experiment called as teaspoon experiment, right? So what is that teaspoon experiment? Say I take a vessel, I take a whatever a flask or whatever you want to take, right? So you add salt solution into it. Say I have water, you add some salt to it, you dissolve it. Okay. Now you take a teaspoon, right? You take a teaspoonful of that particular solution from the topmost layer, right? So if I want to explain you like this, say I have a solution, right? So I am going to take from this particular area a teaspoon. I taste it. Okay, right. Okay, fine. I'll get some taste. Obviously, you'll not like it because it's salt solution, right? Now what I do, I take another teaspoon of the same solution from the bottom, from here. Oh, once again, there's something. Okay, right. So from the bottom, I'm going to take, right? So again, you taste it. What will you see? What would you expect? Will you expect the taste to be same from both the points or different? Same, right? So that's exactly what is called as your homogeneous mixtures. The concentration of the salt or the amount of salt present in water in all these points, in this point, this point, this point, this point, all these points, the amount of salt particles present is same, right? So those are what are called as homogeneous mixtures, right? Now exactly when I go for the other one, that is heterogeneous mixtures, right? Heterogeneous mixtures are going to be exactly opposite. The concentration is not uniform, or the solute or the one of the particle is going to have different concentration or different amounts in different points in the mixture. Example is suspension, colloids, right? So homogeneous, under homogeneous mixtures only you have solutions. That is what we are going to study about in this chapter, right? And under heterogeneous mixtures, you have two types. Those are what are called as colloids. And another thing you have is what is called suspensions. Okay. So in your 12th class, yeah. Suspension. Okay. If you want to write properly, suspension. Right. Suspension example is sand and water. You take sand, you put it in water. Obviously, all the sand particles are going to settle down, right? So that is what is called as suspension. Okay, right. So in this, so you will be studying about these two stuff in your 12th class. You will be studying about solutions, and you will be studying about colloids in your 12th class. There's a separate chapter called surface chemistry, right? So in that chapter, you'll be studying about colloids. So that we'll see later. So for now, we are going to study about this particular part. Those like if at all I have to call it specifically, I can call it as true solutions, right? So just a name. Okay, fine. So we understood where the origin of all the solutions we understood. Okay. Now next thing what you have to understand is what are these solutions made up of, right? So we understand again. You have been studying this again from the previous classes. What are the solutions made up of? Yes, they are made up of two things, solute and solvent. Right. Now the question comes, right, sir, how do I define a solute? How do I define a solvent is the next question that comes to our mind, isn't it? Right. Now, generally what you say, I think you must have again maybe studied about it. How, like generally what do you say? If I give you a solution, how will you determine which is a solute and which is a solvent? Sorry? Separation. Dissolve what? Okay. Okay. Putting it this way, I understand what you're trying to say. Whichever is getting dissolved is solute, and whichever is dissolving something is a solvent. Is it not? Right? Whichever is getting dissolved. For example, if I take a salt solution, salt is getting dissolved in water. That is my solute. Right? And water is dissolving the salt. So water is a solvent. But again, this is not so good of an explanation. What if I have a liquid-liquid solution? So I can have both the solute and solvent both to be liquids. Then what will you say? Right? So you understand there are certain complications here, right, in defining what are solutes and what are solvents. Right? So these things will not be given in your book, but just for your understanding. Right? Now there are two ways of looking at it. Right? There are two ways of looking at what is going to be the solute and what is going to be the solvent. Okay. Say one case. Case one is when the solute and solvent are in different phases. Right? Say I have two things, A and B. They don't know which is solute, which is the solvent. Okay. But say assume that A is in solid form and B is in liquid form. I'm just assuming some random thing. Basically, what you have to understand is case one, the solute and the solvent are in different phases. This is the case one. Right. Okay. So then in these kind of cases, how will you determine which is a solute and which is a solvent? Right. Now what you have to do is you have to look at the solution. Okay. Now you have to look at the solution. Depending on what is the phase of the solution, you will be able to determine which is a solute and which is a solvent. For example, if I find that the solution is in liquid phase, if I find that I mix a solid and a liquid, and I'm finding that the solution is in liquid state, right, I will tell B is the solvent. If I find that the solution is in solid state, then I will tell A is my solvent. Do you understand? Right? Depending on what is the phase of the solution, you will be able to determine which is a solute and which is a solvent. Right? And this, I think in this example, you can easily understand. A is a solid. B is a liquid. If I find that solution is in liquid phase, then B is a solvent. Then if I find that solution is in solid phase, then A is my solvent. This is case one. Right? Now, if I go to the second case, where both of them are in same phase. For example, say A and B are there. We don't know which is a solute, which is a solvent. Right? Say assume that both of them are in liquid phase. Okay. Now in this case, how will you determine? Right? Now you have to look into the amount of A and B. Whichever is higher in amount is the solvent. As simple as that. Right? Say I have ethanol water mixture. Both are liquids. Right? Say if I have 100 grams of water, 80 grams of ethanol, water is my solvent. But if I put it ulta, if I put 100 grams of ethanol, 80 grams of water, ethanol will be the solvent. You understood? Right? So whenever you have same phase, right, whichever is in higher amount, that is my solute. Okay, right? Fine. So now we understood what is solution made up of. It is made up of solute and solvent, and now you know how to determine which is the solute and which is the solvent. Okay, pretty fine. Right. Now next thing is, what are the different types of solutions? Right. I mean, I'm going for classification of solution. Right. Now, people have this general idea that solutions generally are going to be in liquid phase. That's what we generally see in our day-to-day life also. isn't it? We see generally solutions generally to be in liquid phase, right? But that might not be always the case. I can have a solid solution also. I think we discussed in the previous case. I can have the solution to be in solid phase, possible, right? Now, what other examples you can give me? Say, if I want to talk about a solid solution. Okay, bear with the spacing again. Okay, so solid solution. If I want to give you an example, any alloy you can have is a solid solution. We know we have alloys, right? Brass we use for lock. Stainless steel is also an alloy. You have so many alloys, zirconium alloys, so many alloys. Basically, what you do in alloy, you mix two or more metals together, right? You get an alloy. That is basically a solid solution, because we know metals are going to be in solid phase generally, except for mercury, right? All the other metals will be in generally solid phase. So if I'm going to mix them together, they will form alloys which are eventually going to be solid solutions, right? Yeah. Non-metals, most of them are gases. We are going to come to that. If I go for a gaseous solution, no, we do it for doping. We use very small amounts just to increase the conductivity. If at all I want to increase the conductivity, there is very minimal amounts. Yes, you can take into that also. Generally, eventually what is there? Eventually what you see is a solid. So a solid solution is what I'm speaking about. Yes? Okay, right. So when I go for a gaseous solution, even I can have a gaseous solution also, right? You want to give me an example? Gaseous solution? CO2 is just one gas. I should have two things, right? In a solution. So it should be a mixture of gas. What can you think of?
Moisture.
Yes, tell me.
Sir, moisture, sir.
Moisture. Again, moisture is made up of only H2O. Only one this thing is there.
So can we say normal air, sir?
Yes, that's the thing. You are to the atmosphere, right? Same thing. Atmosphere, air, all of these can be examples. Again, air is what? Air is a mixture of gases, right? And please understand, people, the amount has to be specified, right? So you have to say that, so we know in our atmosphere, by volume, we say that 22% of oxygen is there, some amount of hydrogen is there, around 70% of nitrogen is there, right? So all these again make up your gaseous solution. Right, fine. So this is the first kind of classification, depending on what is the phase of the solution. Either I can have a solid solution, liquid solution. We know liquid solution has so many examples: salt solution, glucose solution, any example, ethanol and water. So many examples you can have. But this two we didn't know till now, right? Solid solution and gaseous solution also exist, right? Okay, this is the first kind of classification. Now, second kind of classification we can have is based on how many components we have, right? Generally, we talk about one solute, one solvent, right? Generally, that's what we do. But it need not be the case, right? I can have I can have water. I can put NaCl salt into it. I can put KCl salt into it. Again, it will mix. Again, it will form a clear solution only. Right? I can put sugar and salt. You would have drank lemon soda. Lemon soda will have sweet, and salt. I think you must have drank, had at some point of time, right? So basically, it is not necessary that we need to have only one solute and one solvent. It is not necessary. I can have more than one solvent, more than one solute. All these are possible, right? So based on that, I can call the classification as binary solution. You know, bi means two, right? That means one solute, one solvent. I can even have a ternary solution, right? So like this pentanary solution, 5, like this I can go on. But in our syllabus, we have only binary solution. But again, you can just know it, right? Just that we can have more than 2 components also to be present in a solution. But in our
is based on what parameter, sir?
Number of components. This classification is based on number of components. Okay? Yeah, fine. So all we have in our syllabus is binary solutions only. Okay, fine. Now, next thing, yes, we understood these are all the classifications. Yeah, actually, we have one more. Can you tell me what is the other type of classification can we expect? Polarity? No.
Volume.
Volume. With respect to volume, how do you classify? Okay, the clue is concentration. Depending on the concentration, how do you classify?
So like molar.
What you're telling is right. What is it? Concentrated solution and dilute solution, isn't it? Right. So concentrated.
Sir, saturated, sir.
Yes, coming to that. Coming to that. Next is that. Yes, that is also there. Coming to that. Wait for it. Okay. So concentrated and diluted solution. We already know what are these, isn't it? So generally, concentrated solutions will have solute more than the solvent. Generally, this is how we speak, but again, this is not correct, right? So there is no proper segregation between concentrated and diluted solution. With say, for example, if I have two solutions with me, right? Depending on which is going to have higher amount of solute, with respect to these two, I can tell that, okay, this is having more concentration and this is going to be more concentrated. Do you understand? Right? But I have only one solution with me. I really cannot tell that it is going to be concentrated or diluted. No, we cannot speak like that. Right? But if I have two solutions, then I can compare. Okay, this is concentrated, this is diluted. With respect to these two, I can speak. Hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Right? Okay, that is fine. Concentrated, diluted, and I think it was Mithun who pointed out that I can have one more kind of classification, saying that I can have saturated, unsaturated. There is one more. What is that? Saturated, unsaturated, and anybody here in online knows saturated, unsaturated, and
Sir, is it super saturated?
yes, super saturated. Correct. Right? Super saturated. Now, what are these? We already know, right? So saturated, I am saturated, I am done. It's like that. That means what? That for the in that particular temperature, right? You will not be able to add more solute to it. Even if you add, it is not going to dissolve. It is going to form a precipitate. Yes, suspension is a good way of putting it. Right? So at a particular temperature, no more solute can be added. And that particular solution is what is called as your saturated solution. Right? Unsaturated is exactly opposite. You can add more amount of solute, it will get dissolved. What even is super saturated? Sorry? Everything is a true solution here. All of them are true. All whatever you're speaking now, all are true solutions only. What do you mean by super saturated solutions? No idea? Anybody here online? What do you mean by super saturated? You coined the term properly, correctly. Can you tell me what is that?
So when excess amount of solute is added.
Okay, just like that. Excess amount means I have a saturated solution. Now you are going to add more amount of solute to it. It will not dissolve. So then what can I do to make this extra solute getting dissolved? Absolutely. Right? You increase the temperature. You have a saturated solution. Right? You add more amount of solute, it will not dissolve. But you just start heating it. It will dissolve. Right? That particular solution, you make a saturated solution unsaturated by increasing the temperature. That is what is called as your super saturated solution. Again, attain saturation. So if you're going to say you start with 25 degrees Celsius, you attain saturation, you added more amount of solute, it became saturated now. Right? Now you go to 35 degrees Celsius, now you can add more amount. But even at that particular temperature, it is going to saturate after a point of time. That particular saturated solution is what is called as your super saturated solution. Okay, right? Wonderful. Right. So yes, these are all the different types of classifications we can have based on different phenomena, different properties. Okay, fine. Now, next thing what you have to understand is how is it that the solution is getting formed, right? Now, like if I have to ask you a question, right? Say I have sugar, water, dissolve. It will dissolve. I have grease, grease for lubrication you use. If I put grease in water, will it dissolve? Will it dissolve? No. But I have grease. I put it in petrol. Will it dissolve? Yes. Now, why is it that so much type of deviations happening? One thing is getting dissolved only in that certain thing. The same thing is not getting dissolved in some other solvent. But that particular solute is getting dissolved in some other solvent. Why all these deviations? Why all these complications is what you have to understand. Right? Now, for that, you need to remember one quote. Right? The quote is this. Like dissolves like. What do you mean by this? If I have one type of solute, right, that type of solute will dissolve only in that type of solvent. That's the way of putting it. If I have one type of solute, it will dissolve only in that type of solute, not in the other type. Now you can ask me, sir, what do you mean by one type? What are the types? We have one being polar, the other one being non-polar. Means what? If I have a polar solute, it will dissolve only in a polar solvent. If I have a non-polar solute, it will dissolve only in a non-polar solvent. As simple as that. Okay? Right. Say, now if I take a salt, for example, NaCl crystal, obviously, okay, first and foremost, some of you attended my classes in 11th class, some of you wouldn't have attended. Tell me, what do you mean by a polar compound? Okay, what do you mean by getting polarized? Absolutely, right? So basically, okay, fine. For it to get polarized, for it to say, one guy, like one of my friends says here that if I'm able to separate the molecule into a positive charge and a negative charge in the same compound, that is what is called as getting polarized. What is the condition? Can all the compounds do it? Then what is the condition? Sorry?
The opposite charges.
Ionic compound. Okay, someone is telling here. What is it?
The opposite charges should be present.
Absolutely. Partial charges should be present. What is the criteria for you to create the partial charges? That's the point, right? So you know that two atoms come together to make a bond, to make a compound, to make a chemical bond, however you want to call it, right? Now, if these two, say I have A, I have B, coming together to make a bond, right? Now, what you're speaking about is this partial positive and partial negative charges. If you're able to make it, those kind of compounds are what are called as polar compounds. Yes, we understand. What is the condition? The condition is that the electronegativity of A and the electronegativity of B should not be equal. Is it not? For example, if I take HH bond, I compare it with HCl bond, right? So what do you see in HH? Both are same atoms, right? Both of them have same electronegativity. So there is no separation of charge here. So this is going to be a non-polar compound, right? But in this case, you see hydrogen is electropositive to some extent, right? But chlorine is highly electronegative, right? So because of this, what is going to happen? We know in a bond, two electrons are going to be there. One electron coming from hydrogen, other electron coming from chlorine, right? So first, we'll just go back to this hydrogen molecule, right? Again, one electron coming from hydrogen, another electron coming from another hydrogen, right? So if I check, where is the electron density maximum? Where do you expect? Exactly in the middle, right? In between these two nuclei, hydrogen nuclei, in the center of these two nuclei, you are going to find maximum electron density. Okay, fine. But if I take this particular compound, since chlorine is more electronegative, what is going to happen? The electron cloud is going to shift more towards chlorine. So that means what? It is not going to be at the center, right? It is going to be more towards chlorine atom. So because of what is going to happen, I am neutral, something negative is coming towards me. Obviously, that will induce a negative charge onto me, right? So chlorine in this case will have a partial negative charge and H will have a partial positive because I am neutral, some negative is moving away from me. That means obviously I will get a positive charge, right? So hydrogen will have a partial positive charge. So these kind of compounds are what are called as polar compounds, right? So if we have these kind of polar compounds, they will dissolve only in polar solvents, right? So for example, if you have NaCl, now this is a very, very perfect example of a polar compound. Here we don't speak about partial charges. Here I have full positive, full negative. I have full Na plus, full Cl minus. Here there is no question of what to say, partial charges. Here they are full positive charge, full negative charge, because they're ionic compound. Cation and anions are completely present. Right. Okay. So now you see this is obviously a polar compound. Even if you have a partial charge, I'm telling it's a polar. So this compound is definitely polar. No doubt about it. Right. So now if I take H2O, again this is polar. Is it not? Because again I know that oxygen is electronegative, del minus, del positive on hydrogen, again del positive on this hydrogen. Right. So this is a polar solvent. This is a polar solute. They will dissolve. Right. Okay, fine. Now, if at all I need to have a non-polar compound, say for example, I take any organic compound. You must have studied some organic compound. Say for example, I take butane. Butane is a gas. Let me take a solid organic compound. Say naphthalene. I take naphthalene bonds. Right? Do you know the structure of naphthalene? Anybody knows? Anybody knows here the structure of naphthalene?
Two benzene rings will be connected, sir.
Sorry?
The two benzene rings will be connected, sir, in a common.
Correct. Benzene rings will be connected. So something like this. This is naphthalene. Okay. So this naphthalene, you see all are carbon and hydrogen. You can tell me, sir, carbon and hydrogen are different elements. So they should have difference in electronegativity. So they should have some amount of partial positive and partial negative, but not so much. Very less. Very little difference in electronegativity is what is going to what will you expect? Okay, so we can consider as a non-polar compound. So now these kind of compounds will not dissolve in water. You try, you put naphthalene in water, it will not dissolve, right? But if you put in a solvent like benzene again is a liquid. Okay, benzene will generally find liquid form, right? Benzene will be able to dissolve this particular compound. Right? So polar solutes will dissolve in polar solvents, non-polar solutes will dissolve in non-polar solvents. As simple as that. Okay, fine. Right. Now, so we understood how is it that it is getting dissolved, what type of solutes will dissolve in what type of solvent. Right. Now let us go into the energy considerations. Right. So in your thermodynamics chapter, in your 11th class, you would have studied about this particular term. Delta H solution. What is this? Enthalpy of solution. Right. Now, how do you define it? Enthalpy of solution. Basically, right? Please understand, people. I have already mentioned this. I mean, to those guys who have already this thing. Whenever you are going to make a bond, whenever a bond is formed, energy will be released or absorbed. Released, because it is getting stable. What the very reason why two atoms combine together to make a bond is because they are going to attain stability, right? How stability and energy are related? If I have high energy, what can I tell about stability of the compound or a particular species? It won't be stable. That means energy and stability are inversely related. Okay. So basically, whenever a bond is getting formed, I'm telling that they are doing so because they want to attain stability. So obviously, how will I attain stability? By giving out energy. Okay. So what you see here, I have a solute, I have a solvent. They are coming together not exactly a bond, but still some kind of interaction, some kind of attractive force. So definitely some amount of energy will be released. That energy is what is your enthalpy of solution. Right? So if I have 1 mole of solute, 1 mole of solvent, when I mix them together, make a solution, the energy released is what is my enthalpy of solution. Okay, right. Now, with the help of this data, by looking at the value of this enthalpy of solution, right, I will be able to determine whether that will be a good solution or a bad solution. Oh, no. What do you mean by good and bad? It's all about how much is getting dissolved. If I see that the solute is completely dissolved in that particular solvent, then I call it as a good solution. If it is not going to, say for example, if you put benzene and naphthalene in water, it is not going to dissolve, so it's a bad solution. Now, all those can be determined with the help of this delta H solution, that is enthalpy of solution. With the help of this data, we'll be able to tell whether it is going to dissolve or not dissolve. That we'll be able to tell. Now please understand, now I told you that when the solution is getting formed, energy is released. Now please understand, whenever energy is released by convention, what is the sign? Negative, right? Whenever energy is released, we give negative sign. Whenever energy absorbed, we give a positive sign. Okay, so more and more negative value of this, that means it is going to have good dissolution. Dissolution means getting dissolved. Okay, so if I have, say, 2 solutions, okay, say 2 solutions, solution 1 and solution 2, right? So I look at the enthalpy value data, say this is minus 100, this is minus 200. Now I can easily say that here I am going to have more solubility. More amount of solute is going to get dissolved, right? Okay, fine. Fine. Now some solutions can even have a positive value, right? That generally solutions, if it is going to get formed, they will have negative value because the energy is getting released, right? Now if I have a positive value of delta H, what do you mean by that? Huh? Dissolution is less. Okay, fine. Sorry? Solid? Solid? No, not necessary, not like that. Say if I have a solution and I see that the delta H value is positive for that, what do you mean by this? More amount of? No.
Exothermic, sir.
Yes, tell me.
There is an exothermic.
Your voice is getting break. It's not clear, Kanna.
Sir, will the reaction be exothermic, sir?
In the chat box, I will see, please. Your voice is getting break. It's not clear.
Exothermic, sir. Now it is clear. Is it now?
Yeah, understood, Mithun. Thank you. Yes. Now means what? Means for me to make the solution, I have to supply energy. That's what it means. Is it not? What do you mean by enthalpy value being positive? Means it's an endothermic reaction. That means what? For me to make the solution, instead of solution giving out energy, I have to supply energy for the solution to get formed. Right? So that is the thing. Okay, fine. Now, how do we decide this? Right? How do we decide whether the thing is going to be positive? I mean, whether the enthalpy is going to be positive or enthalpy is going to be negative. Right? Now, that all depends on the strength of the interaction. Right? Now, please understand, before you are forming the solution, before you form the solution, you have 2 types of interaction. Solute, basically NaCl. If I have crystal, Na plus Cl minus, Na plus Cl minus, Na plus Cl minus, it is going to be arranged. You will see in solid state how is it arranged. Okay, so what you have to understand is now, before I form the solution, right? These there are 22 kinds of attractive forces. One between solute and solute, and the other one is obviously going to be between solvent and solvent. Absolutely. Right? Okay. Now, when I'm going to make the solution, what I'm going to have? I am going to have solute-solvent interaction. right? Okay, so now looking at this, I understand is for me to make the solute solvent interaction, for me to make the solution, right, I have to break the solute solute interaction, I have to break the solvent solvent interaction, and I have to make the solute solvent interaction, right? Okay, now for these two, that is for me to break solute solute, for me to break solute solvent solvent, obviously I have to supply energy, no doubt about it, right? And obviously this is going to give me energy. Say this I call it as E1, this I call it as E2, right? Now the enthalpy value depends on these two values, right? Depending on which is higher, which is lesser, easily I'll be able to tell whether the enthalpy value is going to be positive or negative. If I find value is greater, right, this value is greater than the energy supplied, that is greater than this value, then definitely the enthalpy value is going to be negative, because the overall energy you see is going to get come out, isn't it? Right? So I can easily say that this, whenever the energy released due to the solute solvent interaction is greater than the energy supplied to break the solute solvent solvent interaction, that is going to form a good solution, in the sense that I'm going to have good dissolution happening in that particular solution. Yes? Okay. So this is how the energy considerations work. Actually, if you can remember from your 11th class, right, enthalpy of solution is a combination of two other enthalpies. What are they? Enthalpy of solution is equal to one enthalpy plus another enthalpy. What are these two? From your 11th class, thermodynamics, if you can remember, what are these? One starts with L. Okay, one is lattice enthalpy, other starts with H.
Hydration,
What is it?
sir.
Sorry?
Enthalpy of dissolution.
I think that this thing is unstable, Raghav. The net is unstable, that's what it's telling. Okay, no issues, no issues. What is it, Kanna? What did he tell?
Enthalpy of dissolution.
Enthalpy of hydration, yes. Hydration enthalpy, right? That's like, or in general, hydration enthalpy we use when the in general we call it as solvation enthalpy, and depending on whatever to be the solvent we use. Yes, right? And that's exactly are these two energies we're talking about. E1 is the energy supplied to break the lattice enthalpy, lattice string structure, right? And this E2, which is energy getting released, is the solvation enthalpy. Okay, so I think I connected what you studied and what you know somehow. Yes, cool. Right. So now we understood all the basics regarding solutions. How is it formed? What are the types? What are the energy considerations? So on and so forth. All the basics are very clear. And none of these, what I thought you will not see that in your textbook. Okay, but these are all very much required for you to appreciate the chapter, or in the sense, broader sense, appreciate the subject, right? Without understanding any of this, I can directly tell concentration is this, molality can just keep on going, but there's no point in doing that. Okay, right, fine, cool. Now we understood everything. Now we'll move on to express the concentration. First, before that, we will define this term solubility. Okay, fine. So solubility, if I have to put it in a small, like in a layman's language, right? So we know that a solution is made up of solute and a solvent, right? So solubility basically talks about amount of solute, as simple as that, right? But again, this is not going to work, right? Say if I have 100 grams of solvent, say I require 2 grams solubility. If I go for 200 grams, maybe it becomes 4 or 5 grams. So we need to have some standard, what is the standard definition? Please take down the definition for solubility. Right, and guys, if you're attending online, hope you're having the notebooks and your pens. Please take down. Ah. That was actually fine. That was actually fine. No issues, no issues. No problem. We'll keep it like that. Understood, understood. No issues, no issues. This is fine. Right. Okay. So, it is the amount of solute. It is the amount of solute required. It is the amount of solute required to form or wait. It is the amount of solute required for a particular amount of solvent. Sorry, right? It is the amount of solute required for a particular amount of solvent to form FORM a saturated solution. To form a saturated solution, as simple as that. Is it not? Right? Say, what is the amount of solute required in that particular temperature for me to form a saturated solution? We know what is saturated solution. That is what is called as solubility. Okay.
Sir, could you repeat the definition again?
Yeah, sure. It is the amount of solute. It is the amount of solute required for a particular amount of solvent. It is the amount of solute required for a particular amount of solvent to form a saturated solution. Okay, fine. Right. Okay, fine. So next is we have to see what are all the factors which can affect solubility. Right? Say if I increase temperature, if I decrease pressure, or something I do, right? What are the effect? What is the effect of these things on solubility? Yeah, will I be able to increase or decrease solubility is the question. Right? Now, one thing we know for sure about temperature, we already discussed for super saturated solution. What happened there? I had a saturated solution. You were not able to add more amount of solute, but if I increase the temperature, what happened? I was able to dissolve more amount of solute. It is pretty straightforward that temperature and solubility are directly related. That is pretty much straightforward. Now, I can give you a mathematical picture for this. There is an equation by which we'll be able to speak, but not required for you. Maybe if you're interested some other day, if you come for JEE classes, maybe at that time it's required, but for now not required. Just you have to understand that temperature and solubility are directly related. Okay, fine. Now next thing is your pressure. Okay, fine. Now pressure we speak only and only if the solute is a gas. Right? So how can I speak? Say when I have ethanol in water, when I increase pressure, obviously you can correlate, you can imagine that it is not going to be a good effect. Nothing will happen basically because liquids are generally incompressible. Right? Again, solid, if I increase pressure, increasing solubility, no. Right? But, excuse me, if I have a solute particle to be a gas, then I increase the pressure, definitely it is going to have some effect because I know it's compressed to a very high level, isn't it? Right? Now, there, for me to understand what is the relationship between pressure and solubility, right, we have one law, and that, I'll go to the next page, it's called as Henry's law. Okay, we'll take on the statement and then we'll continue. Please take on the statement for Henry's law. Right? So basically Henry's law gives the correlation between pressure and solubility. That's what we're going to speak. Okay. Take a statement. The solubility of a gas in a liquid, the solubility of a gas in a liquid is directly proportional. The solubility of a gas in a liquid is directly proportional to the applied pressure, or to the applied external pressure unit. To the applied external pressure. Right? So I'll repeat the statement, please check. Right? The solubility of a gas in a liquid is directly proportional to the applied external pressure. Okay. Now looking at the statement, can you give me a practical example for what you saw from the statement? Can you give me a practical example? Absolutely. Right? Now you take any aerated drink, right? You take, say, Coca-Cola or whatever it is, soda water, whatever you do, right? When you open it, right? Sometimes if you open it a little fast, if you have shaken it before, you will see so much of fuss coming out, isn't it? Right? Now, why is it happening? It's because you know that in that water, in that solution, or in that solvent, I have dissolved carbon dioxide. Okay, all the aerated drinks contain carbon dioxide in them. Okay, so for me to increase the solubility of carbon dioxide in that soda water, what I do, I seal them under very, very high pressure. That is when you're opening it, you see that the pressure is getting reduced. Right? So that's exactly what we are doing here. That's what Henry proposed. Sir Henry proposed. Before we shake it, yes, because now if you have not shaken it, right, all the carbon dioxide will be dissolved properly. Now when you're going to shake it, what is going to happen? Some amount of carbon dioxide will come to the top layer. Do you understand? So now when you open it, it is going to come out faster. Obviously, right? Say you take anything. For example, you have a sand solution with you, right? Say sand solution, generally it will be at the bottom. Now you shake it, will it be at the bottom? It is going to get dissolved. Some of them will come to the top. Is it like that? It's like that. Not like that. I'm telling carbon dioxide in that point is going to form a homogeneous solution. It is all in all the points. The amount of carbon dioxide is the same. But when you are going to shake it, right, all the liquid particles will hit the carbon dioxide, and some amount of carbon dioxide is going to come to the top, and that's why you see fast coming out faster. That is how it is. Okay, right. So in simple words, if I have to put it in mathematical form, Henry's law, what it says is X is my solubility, right? X is a number, solubility. Okay, now this X is proportional, directly proportional to the pressure applied, right? Okay, or I should write it ulta. It should be P is directly proportional to X, just for the convenience of mathematics. Okay, so what I can write is P is equal to KH into X. To remove the proportionality sign, I put a constant. KH is what is called as my Henry's constant. Right? KH is what is called as my Henry's constant.
Sir,
okay, X is, yeah, what is it?
What is the value of this constant?
What is the okay? Value depends on different solution. Sorry, different solvent. For water, 1 kH value. For ethanol, some other kH value. KH depends on the solvent. It will have different value. Okay, it depends on the solvent. Okay. KH is my Henry's constant. Okay, fine. So one of the practical examples we saw was aerated drinks, soda water or whatever it is. Can you tell me any other example? Practical example. Can you think of something? Oxygen in water. Okay, fine. Oxygen and water. Yes, I understand that oxygen and water is dissolved, but how will it correlate to this particular law? Okay, say you are here in Chennai, right? You are near the sea level, you know, the beach is nearby, right? Say you go to Jammu and Kashmir, right, which is at a very high elevated heights, right? Now, what do you feel? Like maybe if you just would have reached Jammu and Kashmir, right, you will feel little suffocated in the sense that you will not be able to breathe properly, right? Why like that? Sorry? Air pressure happens what? Air pressure decreases or increases? Decreases, right? So as I go higher and higher from the sea level, the pressure drops. What happens to solubility of oxygen in air according to the statement? Decreases. Is it not? Now X is what we are talking about, the solubility of oxygen in air, right? Now when I go higher and higher, when I go to elevated heights, I see that the pressure is dropping, pressure is decreasing, right? So definitely solubility will also decrease. That is why we don't find enough oxygen for us to breathe. And that, yes. Yeah, okay. Gas and a liquid generally, but again, this is just an application part, right? Just for you to understand how this generally works. Okay, right? So this is another practical example you can think of, right? When I go higher and higher, pressure reduces, solubility of oxygen in air reduces. That's why we feel little suffocated. Okay, right? If we go to your textbook, there will be one more example.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, but air is not a liquid, no, sir. Then how can?
Same question
How
was
is it?
asked here. Same question was asked here, just for you to understand, just for you to have a practical example. That's it. Nothing big.
Okay, sir.
Okay, right, fine. So now if you look at this here, Henry's law finds application in industry and so many things. First one I already discussed, right? To increase solubility of CO2, we seal them under very high pressure, right? And look at this. See, this question has been asked so many times in board exam. What are the applications of Henry's law? Okay, and when I wrote my exam, this question came. Well, okay, so you look at this. Scuba divers, just read the statement. Scuba divers must cope with high concentration of dissolved gas while breathing air at high pressure. What happens? Now, when I go, scuba divers, you know, they will go to very high depth of water in oceans, right? So when I go deeper and deeper, the pressure increases. Is it not? Now, when pressure increases, obviously solubility increases, right? That's what they tell. So they have to cope up with increases the solubility. Okay, what is it? Increased pressure increases solubility of atmospheric gases in blood. Basically, what happens when I go to higher pressure, our body suffers very high pressure, and in our blood is also liquid, right? So that blood will try to dissolve nitrogen. Now look at this, right? So when the diver comes to the surface, the pressure gradually decreases. This releases the dissolved gases and leads to formation of bubbles. So what happens, right? So when he dives inside, the pressure increases. So the solubility of gases in his blood increases. Okay, that we understood, right? Now when he comes, what they say, right? What you don't have to see. Look at what they say. You generally understand. When I come down to surface, pressure decreases again, right? The solubility of the gases will again decrease, right? So what will happen if the pressure decreases? The gas will try to come out of your blood, right? That's what they say. So look at this. This releases the dissolved gases. Whatever dissolved initially when I was at the depth, it is now coming out, leads to the formation of bubbles of nitrogen in blood. So when it's going to come out, I'm going to say in Tamil, if I have to speak Koppalam, right? So when they're going to come out, right, you are going to see bubbles of nitrogen on your skin and your blood, right? And that is what is called as your bends. Okay, the bubbles of nitrogen coming out of your blood, is what is called as your bends. This is another application. Okay, now I think there will be another application. Yes, we already spoke about it. At higher altitudes, we know we are going to suffocate. That we already spoke. Okay, fine. So this is about Henry's law. Okay, fine. Next one. What happened? Okay. What's the time? Okay, 6:10. Right. Fine. So we spoke about solubility of a gas in a liquid. Okay, we understood. Right. Now, next thing what we can understand is we talked about solubility. Right. What are the different ways for us to express solubility? We said that it is the amount of solute. Right. That amount can be mass, can be number of moles, can be volume, it can be anything, right? That amount is just an amount of substance, right? What are the different ways by which I will be able to express concentrations? Okay, what are the different ways of expressing the amount of solute? Right? There are a few ways. We'll see one by one. Okay, again, this is where the mathematics comes in. The mathematics come in again from the Henry's law. There can be problems from that. And this is in this chapter, this is one of the famous places where you can get problems. Okay, so for today, we'll just look into what are the different concentration terms. Maybe next class, we'll look into what are all the problems we can see. We'll try to solve some problems on this. Okay, fine. The first one is what is my percentage composition. Okay, percentage composition. You would have studied again all this in your 11th first chapter. Right, we are just going to quickly go to the recap of all this. Okay, so percentage composition can be of three types. Okay, it can be okay, fine. Can someone tell me what are the three types we can have of percentage composition?
Mass by mass.
Mass by mass, then mass by volume, then volume. Yes, absolutely. Right. So three types can be there: mass by mass percentage, mass by volume percentage, and volume by volume percentage. Okay. So we'll try to see definition is important, formula is important. Sometimes formula will not help you, but definition will help you. Right? Even if you don't know the formula, don't worry about it. But if you know the definition, that will help you to the problems. Okay, formula is not that important. Definition is more important. Okay, fine. So we'll try to first define what is this M by M percentage. Please take to the definition. It is the mass of solute. It is the mass of solute present in 100 grams of the solution. It is the mass of solute present in 100 grams of the solution. I think the statement is very straightforward, isn't it? If I have 100 grams of solution, what is the mass of the solute? For example, if I tell that I have 20% solution, 20% HCl or NaCl solution for M by M, 20% M by M NaCl solution. What means what? I have 20 grams of NaCl. Yes, tell me what is it?
20 grams, I said, sir.
Sorry?
I said 20 grams.
Yeah. Okay. 20% of NaCl. Yes, that's what I'm going to tell. What do you mean by this 20%? Right. So 20 grams of NaCl is present in 100 grams of solution. Solution means what? NaCl plus solvent, water generally. Okay. Now if I ask you 20 grams of NaCl is there in 100 grams of solution, what is the mass of water?
80
grams. Right. So you understand, we didn't even go for the formula, but you are able to get so much information from the definition itself. Right. So if I say 20% of NaCl, that means what? 20 grams of NaCl is present in 100 grams of solution. Or in other words, I can tell that 20 grams of NaCl is dissolved in 80 grams of water. Indirectly again. Okay, right? Fine. Now we'll go for this m by v. Let's go for this. We'll define it. Take out the definition. It is the mass of solute. It is the mass of solute present in 100 ml of the solution. 100 ml of the solution. Okay, same thing. If I tell 20% NaCl in m by v, that means 20 grams of NaCl. Instead of this gram, I put ml. That's it. 20 grams of NaCl is dissolved in 100 ml of the solution. That's it. Now in this case, I have only one liquid, that is water. So I can directly say that 20 grams dissolved in 100 ml of water. Directly I can tell. Why? Because there is only one liquid here. NaCl is a solid crystal, right? So in this particular case, we can tell that 20 grams of NaCl dissolved in 100 ml of water directly. But we should not go for every time we should not do like this. Generally, what is it? Like 20 grams of NaCl in 100 ml of solution. That's how we speak. Right? I think last thing you'll be able to guess by yourself, V by V. Please take the definition. Exactly. Right? Volume of solute present in 100 ml of the solution. Right? Volume of solute. Now this will generally work for when you have both solute and solvent. This will work. Is it not? Because we cannot generally speak what to say, mass of a liquid. Generally, it's not that good. Generally, we speak about in terms of volume, right? So, volume of solute present in 100 ml of the solution, right? Now, based on all the definitions we saw, we'll be able to give a beautiful formulas for all of these, right? So, we'll try to give formulas for m by m, m by v, and v by v. So, we'll go for it. Again, I told you definition is more important because that is what is going to help you in doing the problems. This might help you, yes, but more useful is your definition. Okay, fine. So m by m, this is the formula. Mass of solute divided by mass of the whole solution into 100. Oh. Right? Okay. And for m by v, it's mass of solute, same thing as the numerator, divided by volume of solution into 100. Okay. And for v by v, it's volume of solute divided by volume of solution into 100. Okay. Very easy. Fine. So that is about percentage composition, right? Next one is molarity, R. Capital M is what we represent it with. Okay, so I don't know, you have been in lockdown for a while, right? But still, in your 10th or 9th class, if you have gone to your, right, you would have seen something like this: 0.5 m NaCl, 1 m HCl, 2 m H2SO4. It would have been written on the label. You would have seen in the chemistry labs if you have gone to your chemistry labs and observed. Right, okay. So what do you mean by this? First we'll take down the definition, then we'll look at the formula. Please take the definition. It is the number of moles of solute. It is the number of moles of solute present in 1 liter of the solution. Present in 1 liter solution. Again, I repeat the statement. It is the number of moles of solute present in 1 liter or 1000 ml, obviously, of the solution. Okay, right? Fine. So if I give you this data, 0.5 m NaCl, if I give you this, what do you mean by this? From the definition, you can easily say that 0.5 moles of NaCl is present in 1 liter of the solution. That's what it means. Is it not? Right? That's what it says. What is molarity? Number of moles of solute present in 1 liter of the solution. Right? So if I say 0.5 m, that means 0.5 moles of NaCl is present in 1 liter of the solution. Okay. Now, can you tell me what will be the unit of molarity? Mole per liter. Volume, what is it? Right? Liter. Right? So remember, it is mole per liter. Mole liter power minus 1 or mole bar liter, or however you want you can write it. Okay? That is a unit for molarity. Okay, right. So now we understood the definition again, guys. For molarity, the formula is really not, like at least previous one formula will be a little more helpful, but here formula is really not that helpful compared to the definition. We'll see when you go to the draw. You will really understand how is it helpful. Okay, fine. So now let me give the formula. Capital M, molarity is equal to number of moles of solute divided by volume of solution. Right? Now if you have volume of solution to be in liters, no problem. Right? But generally we don't go for liters and all. We generally speak in terms of ml. Right? So if you find that the volume is in ml, in the numerator you multiply it by 1000, just to have mole per liter coming out.
Sir,
Okay? Yeah. Any doubts?
sir, what is the formula to find the number of moles of solute, sir? I forgot. What is the formula to find number of moles, sir?
What is the formula to find the number of moles? Okay, number of moles. Yeah. Okay, number of moles is given mass divided by the molar mass. Right. For example, if I give you, I have 88 grams of carbon dioxide. How many moles? Can you tell me? 2 moles. Right. 88 is the given mass. Molecular mass of CO2 is 44. So you'll find that it is 2 moles. Okay. Right. Now, guys, in most of the time, in the case of problems, what will you find is if they give something regarding the volume, good, you can substitute in the formula. But if they don't give you anything, any information regarding volume, assume volume to be 1 liter. Okay, and if you assume volume to be 1 liter, we can assume molarity to be equal to number of moles. Is it not? Because when the volume of solution is 1, what happens? Now M and number of moles are equal. Right? So in the problem, if they give you volume, well and good, okay. If they don't give you volume, assume the volume to be 1 liter. Right? But again, if at all they might indirectly give you volume. Say for example, they can give you mass and density. Then you can find the volume. So at that time, don't assume. But if there is no way to find the volume, then you assume the volume to be 1 liter. And if you assume the volume to be 1 liter, I can easily tell that the number of moles of solute is equal to whatever the molarity is given to you. Is it okay? Right? Good. We'll just take one more and then wind up. Right? The next one is molality, which is denoted by small m. And for this particular chapter, this is very important because you will see it coming when you go for colligative properties. Don't worry. For now, just know that. Okay, we'll take on the definition first. It is the number of moles of solute present in 1 kg of solvent. Right? It is the number of moles of solute present in 1 kg of solvent. Right? Okay. So again, same thing I can tell you. If I have say 0.5 small m NaCl, that means what? I have 0.5 moles of NaCl in if it's an aqueous solution, what I can tell about it? In 1000 grams of water, aqueous solution, solvent. Okay. Now please understand there is a difference between molarity and molality. Two differences. There we speak about volume. Here we speak about mass. And second difference, there we speak about solution. Here we speak about solvent. Two differences. Okay, fine. So again, the same thing applies. If they have no information given to you regarding the mass of solvent, assume that the mass of solvent is 1 kg, and you can assume then what? The molality is equal to the number of moles. Same way as we saw in the previous case. Okay. So anyways, I'll give you the formula now. For molality, small m is equal to number of moles of solute divided by the mass of solvent. Again, the unit, right? The unit of molality is mole per kg SI unit. It's not grams, but again, we generally use grams for our calculations, right? So in that case, if you use grams, you have to multiply it by 1000 in the numerator. Okay, right? Anything else I have to tell? Yeah. One more thing, one last thing, and we'll wind up. Okay. Now, there is going to be temperature dependence, right? Now, if you take molality, for molality, even if you increase or decrease temperature, molality will not change. Why? Because you have number of moles, you have mass. Basically, both mass and mass is what you have. If you have a closed container, you are not, or even if you have an open container, generally mass will not escape, right? But if I have molarity, you see here there is volume, right? So molarity is temperature dependent, whereas molality is not. Please take a note, right? Molarity, capital M, is temperature dependent because I use volume there. Volume will get reduced if I increase temperature, right? Whereas molality is not. It is not temperature dependent. This is also a question, 1 mark, it can come. Okay, so fine. So we have few more. We have ppm and stuff. We'll look at it in the next class and we'll do some problems on all of this. Any doubts? Any question you want to ask? Here, online people, there, guys, you guys.
I
Want to ask
have
anything? Any questions? Yeah.
So when you got the good solution and the enthalpy, you told that when E2 is greater than E1, it has a good dissolution.
Yes, yes, yes.
But E2 is exothermic, no sir?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And it has a negative enthalpy value.
Sorry?
If it is exothermic, it has negative enthalpy value, no sir?
Correct, yes.
And how can negative be greater than positive, sir?
Magnitude is all about the magnitude. Positive or negative doesn't matter. But the magnitude of energy released is greater than the magnitude of energy absorbed, then the enthalpy, overall enthalpy will be negative because we are going to give a negative sign to the energy released because of that. Yes, understood?
And what if it is equal, sir?
What if it is equal? Okay. If it is equal, then you don't form any solution actually. That means what? The solute solvent and solute solvent, all interactions are same. Right? So maybe you will form, like what to say, you don't have to supply energy, you don't have to release energy. Yeah, the solution, but not so much of dissolution happening.
Okay.
Yes? Okay? Right.
Yes.
Fine. Any other questions, guys? Fine then. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, guys. All
Thank
of
you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Stop.